Ambassador Gerónimo Gutiérrez, 2017, 2018.
That's correct.
This is a very low point in the U.S.-Mexico relations. Let's talk about the challenges. What are the challenges that you face?
Well, let me start by saying, Alfredo, that it's a pleasure to see you. There's a few people that have actually devoted so much time to studying the relation and the border itself as you have, so it's always a pleasure to see you. Perhaps a sort of a personal note on this is that the two times that I've been asked to get directly involved in U.S. affairs has been under very strenuous conditions or tense moment in the relationship. The first one was in 2003 when we were sitting member, non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, and the Iraq war was taking place. And I had to face that as Undersecretary, deal with the fact that the United States at that time was very much involved in the war in Iraq, and our position mattered a lot. So it was a difficult time, actually.
This was during the time of President Vicente Fox.
Yeah, President Vicente Fox and President Bush. And the second, which is really when I became ambassador, was I was, in a sense, called and invited and asked to be an ambassador because President Trump had arrived. It was at a time that it was very clear it would be a challenging phase in the relationship. I don't regret it, either one of them. And after almost 17 years of being involved in U.S.-Mexico affairs, and specifically in those two times, I say that I'm still optimistic about the relationship. I think that in the end, the weight and the importance of the relationship for both countries ends up pretty much saving the day. That does not mean that there are ups and downs, some of them quite difficult, but I think that in the end, I remain optimistic about the relationship.
Pero en ese momento el clima era muy tenso, la retórica era queremos muros. ¿Cómo se mantiene la relación?
Lo que creo es que cuando entra el presidente Trump, había evidentemente una gran preocupación de qué le iba a pasar a la relación bilateral y había una gran interrogante de cómo manejar este nuevo fenómeno. Básicamente durante 25 años, sobre todo después del Tratado de Libre Comercio México y Estados Unidos y Canadá, la relación, se puede decir, había venido evolucionando con una tendencia muy, muy positiva, ¿no?
Claro.
Una tendencia positiva en general. Y de repente, y en México había, me atrevo a decir, una visión pues, no plenamente compartida, pero creciente en importancia de que tiene sentido tener una buena relación con Estados Unidos, de que es útil para México tener una buena relación, de que es una relación en que podemos ganar como país y que es una relación, digamos, ganar, como se dice. Y eso cambió muy pronto. De repente tienes un presidente de Estados Unidos que dice, no solo dice no quiero ser tu socio prácticamente en términos comerciales, sino pone una serie de adjetivos que resultan profundamente insultantes, indignantes para los mexicanos en general. Entonces, claramente hay una gran interrogante. Cuando yo comparecí en el Senado de la República para, en caso de ser ratificado como embajador, mencioné algo. Dije que la relación entre México y Estados Unidos a partir de la llegada del presidente Trump se encontraba en un punto crítico. Como ocurre frecuentemente, eso hizo un poco de noticia, recibí varias llamadas y me preguntaron si había dicho lo que realmente había dicho eso. Y les dije, sí, se encuentra la relación en un punto crítico, no en crisis, pero sí en un punto crítico, entendido como un momento en el cual va a cambiar el status quo. Y en el que tenemos, y dije, hay una posibilidad real de que se descarrile la relación y también hay una posibilidad, a mi juicio, de construir una relación más madura. ¿Por qué? Porque era la primera vez en 25 años que realmente nos estábamos enfrentando pero ya después de habernos llamado socios. ¿Y qué pasa en una relación entre socios cuando tiene un conflicto y se supera? A mi juicio, muchas veces lo que pasa es que se construye una relación más madura. Y creo que en eso estamos. La relación hoy, 3 años después de eso, de cuando inició mi gestión como embajador y la administración del presidente Trump, creo que está más estable. Creo que todavía hay muchas interrogantes de qué pueda pasar en el futuro. Creo que se ha dado mucha mayor estabilidad y un paso muy importante con el nuevo tratado México, Estados Unidos, Canadá, pero sin duda hay enormes retos.
But I mean, how do you deal from going from a very institutional, as you said, more of a positive relationship, to all of a sudden it's not just really the State Department dealing, the institution. Now you have a Jared Kushner playing a very big key role between both countries. How do you step aside and keep it together?
Well, one of the things that happened during this period, which I always emphasize, and in fact it really, during my tenure as ambassador, there were very tense and very difficult moments. But one of the things that always kept me going, in addition to the fact that I'm a firm believer that it's in the best interest of Mexico and the United States to have a positive relationship, is that many people, I think, in the United States had to go out of their way for the first time and advocate for the relationship. And I'll give you an example. At that time, there was an op-ed piece of 8 U.S. ambassadors, I believe in one of the major newspapers, Washington Post, if I'm not mistaken, that wrote in favor of the relationship and in favor of Mexico, saying, this is important, Mexico is our neighbor, they're a partner, sure we have problems we need to tackle, but don't, shake it, but don't break it, if I may use that term. You had a similar situation with 8 of the former commandants of the Southern Command putting out a statement saying, Mexico is important, it's a partner, we need to continue to work with them. So I think that something that helped, in fact, is that a lot of people, institutions, the private sector, NGOs, former people former public officials that had went out and say, be careful, this relation is important for both sides. And to me, that was extremely helpful. Now, as an ambassador, I think you're just, in a sense, a traffic cop. In one way you can see it. You're not going to be able to handle by yourself everything that goes in the relationship. That will be absurd. The relationship is too complex and too comprehensive to do that. So what you try to do is, at least in my case, was actually take advantage of the fact that several actors play in the relationship and use them, working with state governments, with mayors on both sides, talking to the private sector, to the church, and getting more people involved. All of them, to some extent, are players in the relationship. An ambassador, I think, should catalyze those players and not assume that this is a single man or a single woman game and that they can do everything by themselves. At least that's what I try to do. And I guess I was partially successful, at least, because I think we managed to get to a better place than the one we were when I arrived. Now, there's been a lot of speculation also about the relationship during the Trump period, in the sense that Mr. Jared Kushner has played a key role, and whether it was appropriate and whether it was good for Mexico. And I would say there's 2 things to that. One is there's always been someone, not into the State Department, that plays a role of being the executive for Mexico. Sometimes it has been the director of Western Hemisphere's Affairs at the NSC. It's sometimes been a cabinet member, but actually plays the role of consigliere to the president on Mexico affairs, and it's the key man on Mexico or woman. So that's not new. This time it was the senior advisor to the president, Jared Kushner, that played that role, who happens to be also related in family terms to the president. I said it publicly and I said again, Mr. Kushner was a very positive influence in the relationship. For whatever reason, and each one can have their own hypothesis about why is the case, he tried to construct a better relationship. And obviously he was, as I was, or, a Mexican official was, you would try to, work towards your country's interest. But the key is trying to at least understand the other guy's interests so you can really identify where they come together. And Mr. Kushner was, I think, helped play that role. And I think he was just a positive influence. So whether he was key or still is key in the relationship, I wouldn't overplay it. That's just my own sense.
Looking back, is there one true achievement that you're particularly proud of?
As my tenure, Ambassador, well, I can. When I spoke last with President Peña Nieto, right before I left to DC, we had a nice and long chat about what was the situation and what to expect and probably what to do. And he gave me the privilege of being very honest with him, and that's just the way I am. And I told him, Mr. President, I think that if you ask me, the Mexicans want two things out of you right now in terms of the relationship with the United States. They don't want you to be pushed by Trump, but they want you to fix this. Because in the end, they know it's important, the relationship, for different reasons for each of the Mexicans. But it's one of those things that, for many different reasons, it's important. A Mexican might have a family member because they do business with the United States, because they like to travel to Orlando or Disneyland. For whatever reason, it's important. So I told him that. I think those are the two things. It's very simple. Let's not get pushed, but let's fix this. And I mentioned this because I think the accomplishment, in a sense, I don't think I exaggerate the point too much, that I left at a critical moment. And my mission was essentially two things. Not having the relationship blow up any further, and do all that I could to get a new trade agreement. Not being a sole responsibility, obviously, of mine, but as ambassador in the United States. And that's what I tried to do. And I think that it was, to a large extent, that happened. Would I have liked to be at a different time in which you can build much more, other types of things? Yes, of course. But you have to understand very clearly the moment you're arriving as ambassador, and mine was precisely that type of moment. And I think we managed, and I'll tell you what I think we managed to do a fairly decent job. Because we went through an election in Mexico. The person who is now president of Mexico, Mr. López Obrador, was extremely critical of a lot of things of the past governments, including what we were doing with the United States. And I have to say, honestly, that I think he largely supported, A, what we were trying to do on trade, and B, many of the ways to approach this situation in the Trump administration. And in fact, something that it is quite remarkable, if you think about it, it's that the USMCA, it's a product of two administrations in Mexico, and it's a product of one of the few things where bipartisan support has taken place right now in the United States. So yes, I do feel proud of that one.
But I got to ask you, it's the last point. He was very critical of the relationship. Did he just sense a need for maturity, or was that candidate López Obrador, and now you have a president who understands that 80% of the trade is U.S.-Mexico, so he has to...
Well, I think to his credit, President López Obrador understood and understands that our trade and investment with the relationship is a very important part of our economy, a very important component, and a very important motor. and that it would be very difficult to accomplish any serious economic plan without that. And to his credit, I think he understood that, and he has been very disciplined to try to get that through, up to the point that it'll be signed next week by the President of the United States, and hopefully ratified in a very near term by the Canadian Parliament, and it will be implemented by mid-year. So I think that's, to his credit, I think that's, and the other thing that I would say, going to your point, Alfredo, is that, and I'll quote former Governor Cuomo, who I believe said that you may campaign in verse and you govern in prose. And I think that happens to everybody, everywhere. Once you're sitting down in the chair, you are a little bit less adventurous, and I think that's a bit of what happens to everybody. So you might be a little bit more critical about things when you're campaigning, and then you suddenly realize that you have to be careful.
Embajador, muchas gracias.
Todo lo contrario.